Alright, roll up. New video series begins today. The TBC launching pad. So my vision for these videos is somewhat concise tips for the actual launch of TBC Classic, whether that be fresh or progressive from current Classic servers. So without further delay, let's get that bread. So the very biggest launch day / week goal tip I have for you is something I've witnessed firsthand on Hellfire EU when Burning Crusade first launched, and also something I've seen in the data of TBC private servers such as Netherwing. And this is the design for the pendant of the Agate shield. It's a very innocuous pattern that you wouldn't really pay too much attention to, but on launch many will be seeking to get dual crafting up to scratch due to it being very competitive at endgame, but also it starts at 0, right? So people are going to be quite keen to get ahead with that and level it up. This design is quite simply the most efficient way to level dual crafting from 120 to 150, and it's in all the guides when you search for it online. So standalone, you've got this idea that it's a good flip regardless, but on Horde side specifically, it's a limited supply, which makes it even more lucrative there. I recall very strongly as a Blood Elf Paladin not even being able to buy the Agate shield design for a whole day, as even the auction house was dry when I was checking during release week. So for Horde, the vendor is Jandia in the Thousand Needles at Freewind Post, just over here, whilst Alliance get infinite supply from Neil Allen, stationed here in the keep at Menethil Harbour. But don't let that dissuade you, it's 15 silver from the vendor, and data suggests from private servers that it's around 10 gold for Alliance. Sometimes it might go a little bit higher, but Horde with its limited supply is looking at 15 to 20 gold, with 30 gold peaks even in months after the server launches. So it's not even just an immediate cash grab. Some of this demand will remain throughout because it's just such an efficient way to level. Now, based on comparing WoW Classic server prices to private server prices for vanilla, it's very likely that the prices I've just said there and shown will be higher if you're on a progressive server, because the huge amount of gold that's already in the system. I mean, you guys have seen the crazy GDKP videos and stuff that people have put out. So treat these numbers as closer to the floor rather than the best case scenario, at least for the launch period. Some of these values will be really high. So in short, on this recipe, don't get gouged at the very least, but perhaps you'll be able to make a little fortune with a few logins and clicks on an alt. Up next, there is Sanguine Hibiscus, and it's quite a mouthful, but this is also quite a small spoiler for the Paladin edition for this video series, but humour me for a second. People who love dungeon farming will probably end up leveling a prop paladin for this purpose, and pretty much every paladin will view dungeon farming in protection spec as their best way to generate income. So there's this duality of it being a very good farm for farmers, and also just being the best way to make gold if you're a paladin main. And there's been quite a few videos about this already that you've probably seen if you found my content. But to get to this stage of farming quite efficiently, there is a very useful item that requires Sporagar Honoured. Petrified Lycangard, I hope that's correct, is basically the heir to the Skullflame shield from Classic for TBC Paladins. It's fairly easy to acquire and does a good job. The Spore Cloud damage does close to the kind of damage you're going to gain from a high-end spell damage shield on your Consecration, so it's the go-to for the basic bitch farming gear set. Whilst Honoured isn't too bad of a rep requirement, buying Sanguine Hibiscus is by far the simplest way time-wise to get from Friendly to Honoured, because 5 of this item gives you 750 Sporagar rep per hand in, so it's really quick if you can do it that way. Now you're probably thinking, cool bro, well, what's that got to do with TBC launch and me? Well, at the beginning everyone will be in dungeons, including you I imagine, and in the Underbog, Sanguine Hibiscus drops as a BOE white item that you will likely obtain a solid amount of if you're grinding those for levels, and I think many will. Initially, the price might not be too great because everyone is blasting through dungeons to level their toons and their reputations for unlocking heroic versions, but there will be times where it spikes due to some gold farm that someone posts about regarding protection paladins. So what I'm saying is, if you don't use it for your own rep, bank it or sell it on later when that kind of video goes viral in the community. Don't vendor these or sell into the initial oversupply. In fact, there may even be a very good chance of buying these low around the first few months and selling them for stonks later on if you're into the patient plays. Next up is something similar, more of a timing play. Enchanting materials, particularly greater and lesser planar essence. Now, it's nothing groundbreaking, but there is some semi-big brain reasoning behind this. As we go into launch, there's often a flood of enchanting materials without many items being acquired yet that actually warrant an enchant. So the market is flooded and prices are low. We all know this.
Duh.
Likewise, we all know prices do go up after that initial supply, but I wanted to put forward that planar essence rarely has the big dips we associate with eternal essences in classic WoW at the moment. This is primarily due to the netherweave cloth economy being very different from the rune cloth economy. It doesn't get quite the same AoE pounding from farmers as rune cloth did. See, one of the best ways to generate these planar essences is to shuffle netherweave cloth into netherweave belts and then disenchant them for a 22% or so chance at 2 to 3 lesser planar essence. But due to the AoE damage capping in TBC, the quality of AoE farming efficiency drops dramatically. Now, don't get me wrong, it will still be a thing that's pretty good for sure, but it's just not the same when AoE damage starts falling off past 10 targets. And that has ramifications on the cloth market and thus planar essences. The data I could grab from Netherwing supports this. After the initial flood of essences, the market spikes up by double, never returning to that low point right at the start of launch, and just continuing to have quite a good price with some troughs and then some bigger peaks over time. So in short, at the very least, keep hold of your early enchanting materials because they're worth more to you on any early luck you get in Karazhan, or just sitting in the bank for when the flood of mats start to slow down and demand starts to pick up to sell on for more money, or to simply save yourself that same differential, particularly on launch. Now, I have no doubts that some people will actually make small fortunes on being diligent with this market alone, so do keep it in mind at the very least. And if you're really into gold making, this is going to be one of those key markets for you, I have no doubt. Next up is the last recipe on the list, and it's a bit of a doozy. Recipe Transmute Primal Might. So early on, everyone's going to want Primal Mights for their initial crafting gear, which plays a central role in TBC progression, especially up to the middle of tier 5. A common gold making strategy will be to pump out Primal Mights on as many high level characters as possible, but this creates demand of course for the recipe. And because of the fact that it scales up in such a way, with more ults getting more daily cooldowns, more gold, etc., the demand is pretty consistent as more and more alchemists are set up. But especially at the beginning is where everyone will want it, and it's pretty damn good as an auction house flip, with early weeks and random peaks later on being around 25 to 50 gold on private servers. The vendor locations are pretty straightforward. Each of the new cities has one vendor with one in supply until it restocks for 8 gold. Alta in the Exodar over here, Malaris in Silvermoon City chilling in this little area, and finally Skreya in the lower city of Shatrath, who is awkwardly placed up in this Arakoa tower thing. I checked the timer out and it appears to be around 4 hours before the recipe is restocked. Of course, you might want to take that with a pinch of salt because of private servers, but it most definitely be quite scarce at times, and essentially again, it can be a good flip, but it can also be a way for you to dodge being gouged. Parking an ult to get yourself your own Primal Might recipes will be a nice little gold save, to be honest, if nothing else. So the final thing I wanted to cover for this video is selling lockouts, and this will primarily be the Karazhan attunement for many of you, but you can also do the same thing for Raven God Anzu in Sethek Hall's Heroic if you're a druid. So the Karazhan attunement has 3 fragments to the key, and each of these is basically a little crystal thing that you have to click, spawns a little elemental, that person kills the elemental and they get a fragment. There's one right at the end of Shadow Labyrinth after a full clear. There's one in Steam Vaults after a few packs, and again in the Arcatraz after a few packs. In particular, Alcatraz is one of the dungeons that very few people like doing. It's a really irritating dungeon by most people's opinions. Obviously some of you will love it. And it requires a small quest involving clearing both Mechanar and Botanica to enter. So due to these two factors, the amount of groups running the Alcatraz is often a lot lower than the attunement demand, especially when it comes to those first wave of alts that are leveling up. So with that said, keep in mind that you can make some gold by selling some of the lockouts you've just done to other keen players in the early days, like a DMT clear in Classic, if you're planning to or wish to be semi-AFK for a bit. And with that said, we're at the end of the video. I hope you found these tips useful. As I mentioned, I will probably extend this to each class and perhaps a couple other areas if I get some inspiration. But let me know if you think there's anything I can change about these kinds of video or add to it to make it better, or perhaps just some tips of your own. I will see you next time though, hopefully in your notifications.